obviously, like we always say, the first step is consult a professional, because I always say at the very least, what a professional does is give you some sort of structure, and you can use that structure to evaluate how far down the path am I. But the actual reality is no one can ever tell you with certainty if you're ready and if you are on track. All we can do is give you an educated guess, a clear guideline. And that's always better than just walking in the dark and one day waking up and you're 60 and you're 65 and saying, what is my reality? So working with a professional, really, the value add there is just giving you a structure to do it, to try at least exactly that, to evaluate how far off the mark is. And we always say, look, every plan is different, but then that plan is just to say, look, this is the average, and how far do you deviate from that? I think people start too late, and I always make the point that I think it's ridiculous that we know that in this country, for most people, the only formal education they'll get is up to high school. Yet we're happy to have a system where people leave matric and no one has made any attempt to give them financial planning. You literally have to go pay someone else to get that. And in that is the first big flaw, because people are not even aware of the problem. And it's only when people reach their mid-40s, early 50s that it dawns on them, it becomes a reality. And by then, just the investment term you have makes it a near impossible situation. Because if we're speaking bluntly and honestly, we know that it's extremely rare, if that someone, a young 20-something-year-old person, starts working from their first salary and says, you know what, I should put something away for my retirement. Yet that's the message we preach, because in a perfect world, that's how it should be. But that's not the reality that we live in. I think, we work in an environment that sort of shuns change. Because you're working with people's money, they sort of always want the tried and tested route. And if you say, well, let's try this, and that additional element of risk of like, well, that's a new way of doing things, and people get a bit twitchy about their money. But I think as well, that's also an excuse. We tell ourselves that so that we don't have to evolve. And that's why I say that in pretty much every other industry, we've accepted that it's the fourth industrial revolution and we can't be doing things the way we did it 40 years ago. So why can't that be in the retirement space? You see the rise of things like robo-advisor, but that only answers half the problem, because we accept that people want an actual advisor because of that trust element. And I think you've seen the rise of robo-advisors just like passives, but the first market crash we have, you're going to see that industry suffer. Because if you're dealing with a robo-advisor and the market tanks, you've sort of got nobody to point back at and blame. Whereas, in a way, I feel that that's another reason why people want advisors. It's, yes, give me guidance, but when things go bad, you've got someone to point your finger at and say, what are you doing? So we don't want to change as the industry. This is how we've done it for the last 50 years, so it must remain like that. How many asset managers or financial planners even have an app? You know what I mean? And you're like, but we accept that for people, their cell phone probably means more to them than their spouse in some cases. Yet, just develop an app. If for no other reason is that app is just to communicate with your clients. I'm not saying we need to reinvent the wheel, but just accept that the way that we've been doing things is not the way that you're going to do things for the next 100 years. It certainly is, because it seems with every passing year, there's an additional 10 pages that you have to fill in just to sign up the client. So in trying to innovate and trying to automate things, that is a hindrance. But at the same time, you have to admit it's a necessary hindrance, because we are working with people's money, and you don't want it to be too much of an open market, and then because people will be exposed to risk. But I think we trying to implement RDR, And one of the things with that is trying to clearly define who are the financial advisors that should be treated as professionals and who are the product pushers. But I think they're missing a little gap there to say, but if you can identify that these are the cream of the crop, then in your compliance, allow them to innovate, because you would assume that at least those trained professionals in their innovation will not be trying to misguide clients or trying to defraud clients, you know. So it's again this whole thing of we as financial planners say there's no one size fits all, yet in everything else that we do, we're trying to find a blanket approach in financial planning, in compliance. Yet we say to every client, no two plans are the same.